Stop trying to be romantic. It's embarrassing." Those were the exact words my husband said to me on our 5th wedding anniversary, right after I handed him the leather-bound photo album I had spent 3 months creating. I stood there in our kitchen in Columbus, Ohio, wearing the red dress I knew he used to love, watching his face twist into something between annoyance and pity. The candles I had lit were flickering on the dining table behind me. The roast I had been preparing all afternoon was perfectly done, and Nathan just stood there, flipping through pages of our memories like they were junk mail. My name is Judith, and I am 31 years old. For the past 6 years, I have been married to a man who slowly convinced me that loving him loudly was a character flaw. I work as a senior accountant at a manufacturing company downtown, the kind of job that requires precision and emotional detachment. But at home, I had always been the opposite. I was the one who remembered birthdays, who planned surprise weekend trips, who left notes in his lunch bag, and texted him good morning, even when we had slept in the same bed. That night, I smiled at Nathan, the way I had trained myself to smile through his disappointments. I told him I understood. I apologized for making him uncomfortable. And then I cleared the table, blew out the candles, and put the photo album in the closet where it still sits today. But something inside me shifted. Not dramatically, not with tears or screaming. It was quieter than that. It was the sound of a door closing somewhere deep in my chest. The next morning, I woke up before him like I always did. But instead of making his coffee and setting out his vitamins, I simply got dressed and left for work. When he texted me asking if I had forgotten his lunch, I replied that I had been running late. It was a small lie, but it felt significant. I had never lied to Nathan before. Not even about small things. That was the first crack. Over the following weeks, I began to study my own behavior like it belonged to someone else. I realized that I had been performing love for years. Not because I did not feel it, but because I had convinced myself that if I just loved him enough, he would eventually love me back the same way. I had been waiting for a return on an investment that Nathan never asked me to make, and he had made that clear more times than I wanted to admit. There was the time I surprised him with concert tickets to see his favorite band, and he complained that I should have checked his schedule first. There was the weekend getaway I planned to a cabin in Hocking Hills, where he spent most of the trip on his phone talking to his brother about fantasy football. There was the birthday party I organized with his friends, where he pulled me aside and told me I was trying too hard and it made people uncomfortable. Each memory surfaced like a bruise I had forgotten about until I pressed on it. My best friend Colleen noticed something was different almost immediately. She and I had been close since college, and she knew me better than most people. Over lunch one afternoon, she asked me if everything was okay. I told her I was just tired. She did not believe me, but she also did not push. That was one of the things I loved about Colleen. She gave me space to figure things out on my own terms, but she also made it clear that she was there when I was ready to talk. Nathan did not notice anything at first. That was perhaps the most painful realization of all. I had spent years trying to make him feel special, and when I stopped, he did not even see the difference. The absence of my affection was invisible to him because he had never really valued its presence. He still expected dinner on the table, his shirts ironed, and the house clean. He still expected me to ask about his day and listen to his complaints about his co-workers. But he did not notice that I had stopped reaching for his hand. He did not notice that I had stopped saying I love you first. I began to wonder how long it would take him to notice. A part of me hoped he would ask. A part of me hoped he would pull me aside one night and say he missed the old me, missed the way I used to look at him. But weeks turned into a month, and then 2, and his obliviousness only deepened. He walked through the house like a man sleepwalking through his own life, completely unaware that the warmth had been slowly draining from every room. I kept a journal during that time. It helped me process what I was feeling without having to say it out loud. One entry read simply, "I wonder if he ever loved me. or if he just loved what I did for him. That question haunted me more than any fight we had ever had. Looking back, I can trace the trajectory of our marriage like a downward slope on a graph. The early years were full of the kind of love I thought would last forever. Nathan was charming when we met at a mutual friend's barbecue 7 years ago. He had this easy confidence about him, the kind that made people want to be around him. He laughed at my jokes and asked questions about my life that made me feel seen. I fell for him quickly, and when he proposed 2 years later, I said yes without hesitation. The wedding was small, but beautiful. We held it in a garden outside the city, surrounded by close friends and family. My mother cried when I walked down the aisle. Nathan's father gave a speech about how I was the best thing that ever happened to his son. I believed every word. I believed that our love was special, that we were building something rare and unbreakable, but cracks began to form almost immediately after the honeymoon. Nathan was not cruel in any obvious way. He did not yell or throw things or call me names. His neglect was more subtle than that. It came in the form of forgotten anniversaries and canceled plans. It came in the way he would zone out when I was talking, his eyes drifting to his phone or the television. It came in the small sighs he made when I suggested doing something together, as if my very desire for connection was exhausting. I compensated by trying harder. I thought that if I could just be more interesting, more attentive, more fun, he would come back to me. I signed us up for cooking classes. I planned date nights at restaurants he wanted to try. I bought lingerie I felt ridiculous in, hoping to reignite some kind of spark. Each effort was met with lukewarm appreciation at best, outright dismissal at worst. My sister Brenda warned me early on. She never liked Nathan, though she tried to keep her opinions to herself. But one Thanksgiving, after Nathan had spent the entire dinner talking about himself, without asking anyone else a single question, Brenda pulled me into the kitchen and asked me point-blank if I was happy. I told her I was. I lied. I was already so deep into the pattern of defending him that the lie came easier than the truth. Our marriage became a performance. I played the role of the loving wife, and Nathan played the role of the man who allowed himself to be loved. There was an imbalance I could feel but could not name. I gave and gave and gave, and he took and took and took, and neither of us acknowledged the transaction happening beneath the surface. I convinced myself this was just what long-term relationships looked like. I convinced myself that passion faded, and what mattered was commitment. I stayed committed. I stayed devoted. I stayed long after the love had become one-sided. The irony is that Nathan probably thought our marriage was fine. He never complained. He never asked for more. In his mind, everything was exactly as it should be. He had a wife who took care of the house, remembered his preferences, and never demanded anything in return. Why would he question that? Why would he change something that was working perfectly for him? But it was not working for me. I felt invisible in my own home. I felt like a service provider rather than a partner. I would sit across from him at dinner and realize I had no idea what he was thinking, what he was feeling, what he wanted from life. And when I tried to ask, he would give me vague answers or change the subject. It was as if intimacy was a foreign language he had never bothered to learn. My job became my refuge. At work, I was competent and respected. My colleagues valued my input. My boss trusted me with important projects. There was a clarity to professional life that my marriage lacked. Expectations were stated. Feedback was given. Success was measurable. At home, I was constantly guessing what Nathan wanted, trying to anticipate his moods, adjusting myself to fit into whatever shape would please him most. The anniversary incident was not the beginning of the end. It was simply the moment I finally allowed myself to see what had been true for years. Nathan did not value my love. He tolerated it. And when it became too visible, too demonstrative, too much, he told me so directly. He called it embarrassing. He called me pathetic. And something in me broke in a way that could not be repaired. I did not make a dramatic decision that night. I did not pack a bag or file for divorce. I simply decided to stop. I stopped planning. I stopped hoping. I stopped trying to be the wife I thought he wanted. And I waited. I waited to see if he would notice the silence where my love used to be. The weeks that followed were an experiment. I treated our marriage like a hypothesis I was testing. If I removed the variable of my effort, what would remain? The answer, I feared, was nothing. The house grew colder without my gestures. I do not mean that literally, though the winter that year was harsh enough. I mean that the emotional temperature of our home dropped steadily, degree by degree, until it felt like we were two strangers sharing a space rather than two people sharing a life. I stopped lighting candles. I stopped putting fresh flowers on the table. I stopped asking about his day before he asked about mine, which meant we often ate in silence because he never thought to ask at all. Nathan's confusion set in slowly. At first, he seemed relieved. The pressure of my expectations, which he had apparently always felt but never named, was gone. He could come home and disappear into the basement to play video games without feeling guilty about ignoring me. He could scroll through his phone during dinner without my eyes pleading for conversation. He seemed almost lighter in those first few weeks, as if a burden had been lifted. But then the lightness turned into something else. He started coming upstairs more often, lingering in the kitchen while I cooked, hovering near the doorway while I read. He would start to say something, and then stop, as if the words were stuck. I watched him struggle with this new dynamic, unable to name what was missing but clearly sensing its absence. The irony was not lost on me. He had spent years avoiding my attention, and now that I had withdrawn it, he did not know what to do with the space. One evening, about 6 weeks after the anniversary incident, he asked me if I was feeling okay. I told him I was fine. He pressed a little, asking if something was bothering me. I told him no. He stood in the living room, looking at me like I was a puzzle he could not solve. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then I remembered all the times I had tried to talk to him about how I was feeling, all the times he had dismissed me or changed the subject, and the sympathy evaporated. My silence was not revenge. It was protection. I had spent years pouring myself into this marriage, and I had nothing left to give. Withdrawing was the only way I knew how to survive. I was not trying to punish Nathan. I was trying to find out if anything of our relationship could exist without my constant effort. And every day, the answer became clearer. Without me propping it up, there was nothing there. Colleen and I met for coffee one Saturday morning. She could see the exhaustion in my face before I said a word. I finally told her everything. I told her about the anniversary, about the photo album, about Nathan calling me embarrassing. I told her about my decision to stop trying, and his slow realization that something had changed. She listened without interrupting, her hands wrapped around her mug, her eyes full of understanding. When I finished, she asked me what I wanted. It was such a simple question, but it stopped me cold. I realized I had not asked myself that in years. My entire focus had been on what Nathan wanted, what would make him happy, what would keep the peace. My own desires had been buried so deep I could barely remember what they looked like. I told her I wanted to feel like myself again. I wanted to remember what it felt like to be valued, to be seen, to be loved without having to beg for it. I wanted a partner who met me in the middle instead of standing at the finish line expecting me to run the whole race alone. I wanted to stop apologizing for having emotions. I wanted to stop shrinking myself to fit into someone else's comfort zone. Colleen reached across the table and squeezed my hand. She told me I deserved all of that and more. She told me she had watched me dim myself for years, and it had broken her heart. She told me that whatever I decided to do, she would support me. Having someone in my corner made the weight on my shoulders feel slightly lighter. That night, Nathan tried to initiate intimacy for the first time in months. I turned away, claiming I was tired. He did not push, but I could feel his confusion radiating off him in the darkness. He was starting to realize that the rules had changed. but he did not understand why or how. He was experiencing the consequences of his own indifference, and he had no framework for processing it. I lay awake for hours that night, staring at the ceiling. I thought about all the years I had wasted trying to earn love that should have been freely given. I thought about the woman I used to be before this marriage hollowed me out. I thought about the future, and whether it included Nathan at all. The answer was becoming clearer with each passing day, but I was not ready to face it yet. My withdrawal was not passive. It was a statement. It was me finally drawing a boundary I should have drawn years ago. It was me saying, without words, that I refused to be the only one keeping this marriage alive. If Nathan wanted to save us, he would have to show up. He would have to fight. He would have to prove that I was worth the effort I had always given him. But deep down, I already knew he would not. Nathan had never fought for anything in his life. He coasted on charm and other people's labor. He took the path of least resistance in every situation. And I was finally tired of being the path he walked on without noticing. The silence in our house grew louder every day. It was the sound of a marriage dying, one unspoken word at a time. And I was done trying to fill it alone. It took Nathan nearly 3 months to finally ask me directly what had changed. We were sitting in the living room on a Sunday evening, the television murmuring in the background, when he muted it and turned to face me. His expression was a mixture of frustration and confusion, like a man who had lost something important but could not remember where he put it. "Judith, what's going on with you?" he asked. "You've been different lately, distant. Is there something you want to talk about?" I studied his face for a long moment. This was the conversation I had been waiting for, the opening I had hoped might lead to something real. But even as I sat there, I could feel the disappointment building in my chest. He was not asking because he was genuinely concerned about me. He was asking because my change in behavior had disrupted his comfort. The difference was subtle, but significant. "I've been doing some thinking," I said carefully. "About us. About our marriage." His brow furrowed. "What about it?" "Do you remember what you said to me on our anniversary?" I asked. "About the photo album." He shifted uncomfortably. "I don't remember exactly what I said." "You told me to stop trying to be romantic because it was embarrassing," I said. "You called me pathetic." Nathan's face flickered with something that might have been guilt, but it passed quickly. "I was having a bad day. You know I didn't mean it like that." "How did you mean it then?" I pressed. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I just meant that you don't have to try so hard. We've been married for years. We don't need all that stuff anymore." There it was. The fundamental disconnect that had been eating away at our marriage for years, finally spoken aloud. Nathan believed that romance was something you did in the beginning, a phase you outgrew once the commitment was secured. He saw my efforts not as expressions of love, but as unnecessary performances that made him uncomfortable. He thought I was the one with the problem. "When did showing love become something we didn't need?" I asked, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. "When did caring about each other become embarrassing?" "That's not what I'm saying," he protested. "Then what are you saying? Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like you've been taking my love for granted for years, and you only noticed something was wrong when I stopped giving it." Nathan opened his mouth to respond, then closed it. For a moment, something like understanding flickered across his features. But then his defensive walls went back up, and his expression hardened. "You're blowing this out of proportion," he said. "I've always been there for you. I work hard to provide for this family. I come home every night. What more do you want from me?" His response crystallized everything I had been feeling. He genuinely believed that showing up and earning a paycheck was the sum total of what marriage required. The emotional labor, the connection, the intimacy, none of that registered as important to him. He thought he was fulfilling his obligations by simply existing in the same space as me. "I want a partner. I said quietly. I want someone who wants to know me, who asks me questions and listens to the answers, who plans things for us sometimes instead of waiting for me to do all the work. I want to feel like I matter to you beyond what I can do for you. You do matter to me, he insisted, but the words sounded hollow, like lines recited from a script he did not believe. Do I asked. Because I can't remember the last time you did something for me just because you wanted to make me happy. I can't remember the last time you asked about my feelings or my dreams or my fears. I've been pouring myself into this marriage for years, Nathan, and you've been standing there with your hands in your pockets, watching me do all the heavy lifting. He stared at me, genuinely stunned. I realized in that moment that he had never once considered our relationship from my perspective. He had been so focused on his own experience of our marriage that my inner life was completely invisible to him. I was not a person with needs and desires. I was a fixture in his life, like the furniture or the appliances. Something that was simply there, serving its function, requiring no maintenance or attention. I didn't know you felt this way, he said finally. That's because you never asked, I replied. And when I tried to tell you, you weren't listening. The silence that followed was thick with years of accumulated resentment and missed opportunities. I could see Nathan struggling to process what I had said, trying to fit it into his worldview where he was a good husband, and I was the one being unreasonable. But the cognitive dissonance was too great. Something in his expression began to crack. What do you want me to do? He asked, and for the first time, I heard a note of genuine fear in his voice. He was starting to understand that this conversation was not about a minor grievance. This was about the foundation of our entire relationship, and it was crumbling beneath his feet. The truth surfaced slowly over the following weeks, rising like something dark and heavy from the bottom of a lake. Nathan made a few half-hearted attempts at what he thought was romance. He brought home flowers once, the generic kind from the grocery store, still wrapped in plastic. He suggested we go out to dinner, then spent most of the meal on his phone. He told me he loved me more frequently, but the words felt performative, like he was checking a box rather than expressing genuine emotion. I watched these efforts with a mixture of sadness and clarity. Nathan was not trying to reconnect with me. He was trying to restore the status quo. He wanted things to go back to the way they were, when I did all the emotional work, and he reaped the benefits without contributing anything. His gestures were not about making me feel loved. They were about making himself feel like he had done his part, so I would go back to taking care of him. The realization was painful but liberating. Nathan did not miss me. He missed the comfort of being loved without effort. He missed having someone manage his emotional needs while he contributed nothing in return. He missed the convenience of my devotion, not the experience of my presence. I had spent years giving him everything I had, and he had spent those same years taking it for granted, never once questioning whether the arrangement was fair. I started to see our entire relationship through new eyes. Every memory I had treasured now carried a shadow of this new understanding. The engagement, which I had always remembered as romantic, now revealed itself as Nathan doing the bare minimum because he knew I would say yes regardless. Our wedding, which I had thought was a partnership, was actually me planning everything while he showed up. Our years of marriage, which I had believed were building something meaningful, were actually me constructing a life that revolved entirely around his needs. My sister Brenda came to visit around this time. She took one look at my face and knew something was wrong. Over tea at my kitchen table, I told her everything. I told her about the anniversary, about Nathan's response, about my decision to stop trying, and about the hollow attempts at reconciliation that had followed. She listened without judgment, her expression growing more concerned with each revelation. I tried to warn you, she said gently when I finished. Years ago, but you weren't ready to hear it. I know, I admitted. I thought I could love him into being a better partner. I thought if I just gave enough, he would eventually start giving back. Brenda shook her head. You can't love someone into changing, They have to want it themselves. And from what you're telling me, Nathan doesn't want to change. He wants you to go back to pretending everything is fine. She was right. Every interaction with Nathan confirmed it. He was not interested in understanding my perspective or examining his own behavior. He was interested in making the uncomfortable feelings go away. When I did not immediately respond to his flowers and dinner invitations with gratitude and renewed devotion, he grew frustrated. He started making passive-aggressive comments about how nothing he did was ever good enough. He cast himself as the victim, the well-meaning husband whose difficult wife refused to be satisfied. One night, he accused me of having an affair. The accusation came out of nowhere, hurled across the living room like a weapon. He demanded to know who I was talking to, why I was always on my phone, what I was hiding from him. The irony was almost unbearable. He had spent years ignoring me, and now that I had pulled away, he assumed another man must be responsible. "There's no one else," I told him, my voice flat. "There's just me," finally realizing that I've been alone in this marriage for a long time. He did not believe me. Or maybe he did, and just could not accept what it meant. Either way, the accusation revealed something important about how Nathan viewed our relationship. He could not conceive of a world where I might leave him for my own reasons. He could not imagine that his behavior might have consequences. In his mind, I was his, a possession that was malfunctioning, not a person who had been pushed past her breaking point. I started sleeping in the guest room. Nathan protested at first, then grew silent, then stopped commenting altogether. The physical distance between us became a metaphor for everything else. We passed each other in the hallway like strangers. We ate meals in separate rooms. We stopped pretending there was anything left to save. My mother called one evening, sensing something was wrong the way mothers do. I told her the abbreviated version, that Nathan and I were having problems, that I was not sure our marriage was going to survive. She was quiet for a long moment, then said something that stayed with me. "Judith, I've watched you shrink yourself for that man for years," she said. "Whatever you decide, I want you to know that your happiness matters. You deserve someone who makes you feel bigger, not smaller." I cried after we hung up, not because I was sad, but because I was relieved. Having my mother's support, her permission to prioritize my own well-being, felt like oxygen after years of drowning. I had been so focused on being a good wife that I had forgotten to ask whether my marriage was good for me. The answer was no. It had been no for a very long time, and finally admitting that to myself stripped away the last illusion I had been clinging to. Nathan and I were not going to make it. Not because I had given up too easily, but because I had given everything, and he had given nothing. And there was simply nothing left between us but the wreckage of what could have been. The moment I told Nathan I was done came on an unremarkable Thursday evening. There was no dramatic fight, no explosive confrontation. I simply walked into the living room where he was watching television and told him that I wanted a divorce. The words came out steadier than I expected, as if I had been rehearsing them for years. Nathan's initial reaction was dismissal. He actually laughed, a short, disbelieving sound. "You're not serious," he said, not even bothering to look away from the screen. "I'm completely serious," I replied. "I've already spoken to a lawyer. I'll be staying with Colleen until we figure out the logistics." That got his attention. He muted the television and turned to face me, his expression shifting from amusement to confusion, to something that looked almost like fear. "Wait, what? You can't just... We haven't even talked about this properly." "We've been talking about it for months," I said. "You just weren't listening. This is insane. You can't divorce me because I didn't like some photo album." His voice was rising now, panic replacing the initial dismissiveness. "It was never about the photo album," I said quietly. "It was about years of feeling invisible, years of being told my feelings were too much, my needs were embarrassing, my love was pathetic. It was about giving everything I had to someone who couldn't be bothered to give anything back." Nathan stood up, his hands gesturing wildly. "I've been trying. I brought you flowers. I took you to dinner. What else was I supposed to do?" "You were supposed to care," I said. "Not because I asked you to. Not because you were afraid of losing me. But because you actually wanted to make me happy. And you never did. Not once in our entire marriage did you do something for me, purely because you wanted to see me smile." He opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. I could see him searching his memory, trying to find an example that would prove me wrong. The silence stretched as he came up empty. "I can change," he said finally, his voice smaller now. "I can be better. Just give me another chance." "I gave you 6 years of chances," I replied. "I gave you every chance I had, and you used them all to show me that my feelings didn't matter to you. I'm not angry anymore, Nathan. I'm just done." The desperation in his eyes was almost enough to make me waver. Almost. But then I remembered all the nights I had cried myself to sleep while he snored beside me, oblivious. I remembered all the special occasions he had ruined with his indifference. I remembered how small and worthless he had made me feel, how I had spent years believing there was something wrong with me for wanting to be loved. "Please," he said, and the word sounded foreign coming from his mouth. Nathan never said please. Nathan never asked for anything because he assumed everything would be given to him. "Please don't do this. I love you." "You love the idea of me," I corrected him. "You love having someone who takes care of you, who manages your life, who makes you feel important without requiring anything in return. But you don't love me. You don't even know me. And I'm not sure you ever wanted to." His face crumpled, but I pressed on. "I'm glad you're learning and growing. I hope it helps you in future relationships. But I can't go back. I can't rebuild trust with someone who spent years teaching me that my love was worthless. Even if you change completely, I'll always remember how you made me feel. I'll always remember the word embarrassing coming out of your mouth. I'll always remember pathetic. Those wounds don't heal just because you apologize." He sank back onto the couch, his face pale. For the first time since I had known him, Nathan looked genuinely shattered. The confident, dismissive man who had called my love embarrassing was gone, replaced by someone who was just beginning to understand what he had lost. "This is really happening," he said, more to himself than to me. "Yes," I confirmed. "It is." I had already packed a bag. I had already arranged to stay with Colleen. I had already made the decision weeks ago. This conversation was just the formality. I picked up my suitcase from the hallway and walked toward the door. "Judith, wait." I turned back one last time. Nathan was still sitting on the couch, looking up at me with an expression I had never seen before. He looked lost. He looked scared. He looked like a man who had just realized that the life he took for granted was slipping through his fingers. "I hope you learn from this," I said, and I meant it. Despite everything, I did not hate Nathan. I was just finished loving him. "I hope the next woman who comes into your life doesn't have to beg for your attention the way I did. I hope you figure out how to be a partner instead of a passenger." He did not respond. He just sat there, watching me leave, as if he still could not quite believe what was happening. The drive to Colleen's house was quiet. I did not cry. I did not feel relieved or triumphant or sad. I just felt empty, in the way that you feel empty after finally putting down something heavy you have been carrying for too long. The weight was gone, and all that remained was the ache in the places where it used to rest. Colleen was waiting for me at the door. She did not say anything, just pulled me into a hug and held me there for a long moment. When we finally separated, she led me inside, made me tea, and sat with me in silence until I was ready to talk. "How do you feel?" she asked eventually. I thought about it for a moment. "Free," I said. I feel free. And for the first time in years, I meant it. The first few weeks after leaving Nathan were a strange mixture of grief and liberation. I stayed with Colleen in her spare bedroom, surrounded by unfamiliar furniture and borrowed toiletries, and yet I slept better than I had in years. The knot of tension that had lived in my shoulders for so long began to loosen. The constant vigilance I had maintained, always monitoring Nathan's moods, anticipating his needs, adjusting myself to his preferences, all of that was gone. In its place was a quiet that felt almost holy. I started to remember who I was before the marriage. I had forgotten so much. I used to paint watercolors on Sunday mornings. I used to go for long walks by the river without checking my phone every 5 minutes. I used to read novels for pleasure instead of just scrolling through news feeds to have something to talk about with Nathan. These parts of myself had been packed away in boxes I was not even aware of, and now I was unpacking them one by one. Nathan called constantly in those first weeks. At first his messages were angry, accusatory. How could I do this to him? How could I throw away our marriage without giving him a real chance to fix things? I did not respond. Then his tone shifted to desperate. He missed me. He could not sleep. He did not know how to function without me. I still did not respond. Finally, he tried bargaining. He would do anything. He would go to therapy. He would plan dates, buy gifts, whatever I wanted. I turned off my phone. My lawyer, a sharp woman named Patricia, who Colleen had recommended, handled all the formal communications. She was efficient and unsentimental, exactly what I needed. She told me that Nathan was contesting nothing, that he seemed almost stunned into compliance. The divorce would be straightforward. We had no children, and our assets were easily divisible. The life we had built together, it turned out, could be disassembled with remarkable ease. I found an apartment of my own after about a month. It was small, just a one-bedroom place on the east side of Columbus, but it was mine. I spent an entire weekend painting the walls a soft sage green, a color Nathan had always said was too feminine. I bought plants for the windowsills and art for the walls and books for the shelves. I filled the space with things that made me happy, things that reflected who I actually was rather than who I had pretended to be. My colleagues at work noticed the change in me. They said I seemed lighter, more present. My boss commented that my performance had improved, that I was more creative and engaged than I had been in years. I had not realized how much of my energy the marriage had been consuming, how depleted I had been from the constant effort of keeping it afloat. Now that I was no longer drowning, I could finally swim. Nathan, meanwhile, was falling apart. I heard updates through mutual friends, whether I wanted to or not. He had let the house become a disaster. He was eating takeout every night because he did not know how to cook. He had shown up at his brother's house at 2 a.m, drunk and crying, saying he had ruined his life. A part of me felt a grim satisfaction at these reports. A larger part just felt tired. He started trying to win me back in earnest. The efforts were almost comical in their desperation. He sent flowers to my office every day for a week, until I asked the receptionist to refuse deliveries from him. He wrote me long letters detailing all the ways he had changed, all the revelations he had experienced, all the promises he was prepared to make. He even showed up at Colleen's house one night, demanding to see me, until she threatened to call the police. The irony was devastating. He was doing now, in panic, everything I had begged him to do for years. He was planning dates and writing love letters and making grand romantic gestures. But it was too late. The gestures rang hollow because they were motivated by fear of loss, not genuine love. He was not trying to make me happy. He was trying to get back the life he had taken for granted. I watched his scrambling from a distance and felt nothing but confirmation. This was exactly who Nathan had always been. Someone who only valued things when they were being taken away. He had not changed. He had just become desperate. And desperation was not love. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday morning in late spring. I sat in the courthouse conference room across from Nathan, and for the first time in months, I really looked at him. He had aged visibly. There were dark circles under his eyes, and a grayness to his complexion that had not been there before. He looked defeated, diminished, like someone who had finally been forced to confront consequences he never believed would come. When we signed the final papers, his hand trembled. He glanced up at me with eyes that were red-rimmed and pleading, but I kept my expression neutral. There was nothing left to say. The paperwork was processed, the signatures were witnessed, and just like that, our marriage was over. 6 years, reduced to a stack of documents and a judge's stamp. Outside the courthouse, Nathan caught up with me. He looked almost pathetic standing there on the steps, his suit wrinkled, his posture slumped. He asked if we could talk, just for a few minutes. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We walked to a bench in the small park across the street and sat in silence for a moment. Then Nathan spoke. "I've been going to therapy," he said. 3 times a week. I'm trying to understand why I was the way I was. I nodded but said nothing. My therapist says I have avoidant attachment, that I was trained from childhood to see emotional intimacy as threatening, that I pushed away anyone who got too close because vulnerability scared me. He paused. I'm not saying this as an excuse. I'm just trying to explain. I'm glad you're getting help, I said, and I meant it. I just wish I had done this sooner, he continued. I wish I had listened to you when you tried to tell me something was wrong. I was so sure I was the reasonable one, that you were being needy or dramatic. I couldn't see how much I was hurting you because I wasn't willing to look. No, I agreed. You weren't. He turned to face me, and I saw genuine pain in his expression. Is there any chance, any possibility that someday, after I've worked on myself, we could try again? I had known this question was coming. I had prepared my answer long before this moment. No, Nathan. There isn't. His face crumpled, but I pressed on. I'm glad you're learning and growing. I hope it helps you in future relationships. But I can't go back. I can't rebuild trust with someone who spent years teaching me that my love was worthless. Even if you change completely, I'll always remember how you made me feel. I'll always remember the word embarrassing coming out of your mouth. I'll always remember pathetic. Those wounds don't heal just because you apologize. He was crying now, silent tears streaming down his face. I am so sorry, Judith. I am so incredibly sorry. I know, I said. I believe you. But sorry doesn't undo damage. It just acknowledges it. We sat there for a few more minutes, 2 people at the end of something that should have been beautiful but wasn't. Then I stood up, wished him well, and walked away. I did not look back. There was nothing behind me that I needed to see. Watching Nathan's 2 late attempts at romance had confirmed everything I had finally come to understand. Love demanded after you have already lost someone is not love at all. It is panic. It is selfishness dressed up in romantic gestures. Real love shows up consistently, not just when its absence threatens your comfort. Nathan had never loved me that way, and his belated efforts only highlighted how little he had truly seen me all along. The man sitting on that park bench was not my concern anymore. My concern was the woman walking away from him, finally free and finally whole. The months that followed the divorce were a revelation. I had spent so long defining myself through my marriage, through my role as Nathan's wife, that I had forgotten I could exist independently. Now I was learning myself again, and I was surprised by what I found. I was stronger than I remembered, more resilient, more capable of joy. I started doing all the things Nathan had complained about or dismissed. I took a pottery class on Tuesday nights. I joined a book club that met at a coffee shop downtown. I signed up for a weekend hiking group and spent my Saturday mornings walking trails I had never explored. Each activity was a small act of reclamation, a way of telling myself that my interests mattered, my desires were valid, my happiness was worth pursuing. Colleen threw me a divorce celebration at her house. She called it my rebirth day. There was cake and champagne and a small group of close friends who had watched me struggle through the marriage and were overjoyed to see me emerge. My sister Brenda drove up from Cincinnati to be there. My mother sent flowers and a card that said simply, "I'm proud of you." I did not date for the first year. I was not ready, and I knew it. I needed to figure out who I was outside of a relationship before I could bring anything healthy to a new one. But slowly, I started to imagine what a real partnership might look like. One built on mutual respect and genuine interest. One where both people showed up consistently, not just when they felt like it. Eventually, I met someone. His name was Thomas, and he was a librarian at the university branch near my apartment. We struck up a conversation one afternoon when I was checking out books for my reading group, and something about his quiet attentiveness caught my attention. He asked me questions and actually listened to the answers. He remembered small details from previous conversations. He made me feel seen in a way I had almost forgotten was possible. We took things slowly. I told him early on about my divorce, about my fears of ending up invisible again. He listened without judgment and made no promises he was not prepared to keep. Our relationship felt different from anything I had experienced before. It felt balanced, sustainable, real. Nathan, I heard through the grapevine, did not fare as well. He continued therapy, but struggled to maintain the changes he had made under pressure. Without me there to manage his life, things fell apart. He lost his job after repeated absences and poor performance. He had to sell the house because he could not afford it alone. He moved into a small apartment and, according to his brother, spent most of his time alone, unable to build the connections he had never learned to value. I felt no joy at his suffering, but I also felt no guilt. Nathan's downfall was not my responsibility. It was the consequence of years of choices he had made, years of taking for granted what should have been treasured. He had learned too late that love was not something you received passively. It was something you built together, brick by brick, with intention and care. And he had refused to build for so long that when the structure collapsed, there was nothing left to save. Walking away from my marriage did not destroy romance in my life. It gave it back to me. For years, I had been pouring love into a void, trying to fill something that refused to hold anything. Now I understood that the most important person to love was myself. That self-worth was not something you earned by being good enough for someone else. It was something you claimed simply because you existed. I look back now on the woman who stood in that kitchen holding a photo album, being told her love was embarrassing, and I wish I could reach back through time and hold her. I would tell her that she was not too much. She was exactly enough. The problem was never her love. The problem was that she gave it to someone who did not deserve it. Nathan's path grew darker in the years that followed. Unable to sustain the self-improvement he had desperately started, he drifted from job to job, relationship to relationship, never staying long, never learning the lessons that might have saved him. His family eventually distanced themselves, tired of his inability to take responsibility. The last I heard, he was living alone in a rental on the outskirts of town. A cautionary tale of what happens when you dismiss love until it is too late to reclaim it. The comfort he once took for granted became the comfort he could never find again, and the silence in his life was no longer peaceful. It was the sound of everything he had thrown away. As for me, I still light candles at dinner. I still plan romantic gestures and remember anniversaries and leave small notes in unexpected places. The difference is that now, these acts of love are appreciated, reciprocated, and treasured. Not just by someone who finally sees me, but by the woman I see every morning in the mirror. The one who learned that ending a marriage was not an ending at all, but the beginning of the most important love story of her life. The one where she chose herself.